welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today I'll be diving into the newest patch 10.15 and all of the changes that come with it. This patch comes off the coattails of 10.14, which had a ton of champions change that shook up the meta. 10.15 is much smaller in scope, but they aim to pull back some of the stronger champions of the previous meta while buffing a few others to hopefully create a more diverse meta. With that all said, let's jump on into the changes. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. All right, let's get back to the video, and to start off, we have a couple of galaxy changes to go over as the only system changes for 10.15. The galaxy being removed in this patch is Neekoverse. It was one of the original galaxies that shipped with the set, so we're sure a lot of players are going to be sad to see it go, as well as happy that it's being replaced. Ego sub in general can cause balance issues, but when you standardize it by giving 2 to every player, it creates a relatively balanced state. But it did come with its own issues depending on the meta, especially right now where an early Bard 2 can skyrocket you towards the top 4. With Neekoverse's removal, there's of course a new galaxy being added, and that's Plunder Planet. Plunder Planet makes it so all champions have a chance to drop a coin on death. It has a few strict guidelines that it follows, so the balance of coins dropped is overall fair. That means you're likely to make a similar amount of gold as the rest of the lobby, even if you're not killing as many champions. Keep in mind that this galaxy does make intentionally losing strategies less viable, as you want to be able to make sure you kill at least a few champions consistently. So make sure when your lobby has this galaxy, you're at least trying to play a semi-strong board to kill 1 or 2 units. Overall, it should be a decent galaxy, as additional gold is always welcome. Lastly, for galaxy changes, there are alterations to the current galaxy, Galactic Armory. Galactic Armory has been complained about relatively often by players, as the 2 items it dropped out could drastically alter the aspects of the game. For example, if you got a carry champion early and use the 2 items, well, then you're instantly ahead of everyone else in the lobby. Or certain items, like everyone getting a Zephyr, were just plain annoying to play against. The change makes it so that now all players get the same 3 item components instead of 2 completed items. This will make the galaxy far more flexible for each individual player, as you can now choose what you want to make with the components. It should be much more interesting to play, as you'll be able to adapt to what components the game drops you, more so now than being forced to use the 2 items that you may not want to. Definitely a great change. Let's move on now and talk about traits. There's only one trait being changed in 10.15, and that's Celestial. Celestial's going from 20, 45, 150% healing to 15, 45, 150%. It's not that big of a change, but it's meant to tackle 2 Celestials being such an easily splashed trait. Whether the meta remains similar in 10.15 or not, we'll have to see, but it was common to have 2 Celestials in quite a few comps last patch. This is due to Ashe becoming an insanely strong champion, as well as Protectors being atop the meta for the frontline. Not only that, but Lulu is a common mid to late game champion because of her ultimate and the fact that she's a Mystic. Those factors all combine together to make Celestial easy to splash for a decent amount of healing. Now, if you want Celestial to matter, you'll have to commit to it more, which may end up hurting the trait by a fair amount. That said, it's likely that 2 Celestials is still going to be an easily splashable trait. It'll just be less effective now. Moving on to the next section, we have a bunch of champion changes for patch 10.15. This is where the bulk of the buffs and nerfs are centered, so let's dive into them, starting off with 1-cost units. Up first is Graves. Graves is having his ability's blind duration go from 2-3-5 seconds to 3-4-6 seconds. Poor Graves has been struggling to be relevant between nerfs he received in the past and a lack of blaster compositions being played. On top of that, Space Pirates has been relatively useless for quite some time. All those combined makes Graves a sad guy, but this change should bring some power back to his kit. We'll have to see how the meta plays out, but with just the buffs to his blind, it should be enough to bring him back into relevance for this meta. Whether he stays in the mid or late game like he did in previous metas will depend on whether Blaster is relevant or not. If it is, then expect to see Graves as a viable champion throughout the game as a means of shutting down ranged carries with his blind. Jarvan is up next, and oh man, was he a problem in 10.14. But he did receive a hotfix to his mana, and now in 10.15, his ultimate's bonus attack speed is going down to 50, 60, 75% from 75, 85, 95%. That puts his bonus attack speed lower than it was prior to the buff it received in 1014, and by a significant margin too. It is not looking great for Jarvan going into the 1015 meta. Let's take stock of the balance done to him in these last two patches. Originally his mana went down to 80, but then got reverted back to 100 with 10 more starting mana. That overall was a small buff, but basically neutral. His health buff and damage buff are still good for him, but only the health buff is relevant. And lastly, his ability is much weaker going into 1015 than it was before 1014. All these changes essentially mean he's just slightly tankier than he was pre-patch 1014. With his ultimate being much less potent, it's likely we're going to see far less Jarvan moving forward in the meta. It may end up being too harsh of a change to him, though his power will more or less be in line with the majority of other one-cost units, most of which aren't particularly relevant anymore. Okay, that is it for one-cost champions. Let's now move on to two-cost champions, beginning with Darius. Darius has been borderline useless since the mid-season update, especially since the only build he was relevant in, Space Jam, became obsolete. But in 1015, he's getting a couple of really good buffs. For starters, his health is going up to 800 from 750, and secondly, his total mana is going down to 50 from 60. While neither of these buffs look that significant, keep in mind that as a melee champion, any amount of increased health makes Darius much more effective. Combine that with the mana change, and it's likely we'll see Darius be able to actually cast his ultimate more than once in a fight. That means more dunks and potentially more gold if you're running Space Pirate. Are these enough to bring Space Jam back into the meta or make Darius a staple champion within the meta? Probably not, as he has other issues that likely need to be addressed. But with Graves also being buffed, you can expect to see far more early game Space Pirates than in the last few metas. Lucian is another blaster getting buffed in 1015, which points towards a potential return to fame for the trait. He's receiving two changes this patch, with one being a reduction to his total mana as it's going from 35 down to 30. The other buff is to his ability damage as it's going up to 175, 250, 550 from 150, 200, 375. Both of these are fairly substantial buffs as he's going to cast more often while dealing more damage. This should add a nice amount of magic damage that's missing for cybernetics, and also, much like Space Pirates, makes a return of the frightening potential of early game cybernetics. As far as the late game goes, it's unlikely that Lucian will be a mainstay carry for any build simply because he's a two-cost champion and thus less overall power. But it should make him a viable early and mid-game carry once again like he was prior to the mid-season update. The last two-cost champion getting a change is Rakan. His health is being altered again, but this time down to 650 from 700. It's certainly a nerf to him, but not enough to make him unplayable. It's a bigger issue that Jarvan is nerfed for Rakan, as overall that makes protectors less viable. Ashe is up first for our three-cost champions, and her starting mana is down to 40 from 50. This makes her initial cast slower, which should lower her overall effectiveness slightly. That said, she's still poised to be an amazing champion, especially with Spear of Shojin. Master Yi is receiving two changes to make him less squishy, as his armor is going up to 50 from 30, and his magic resist is going up to 35 from 20. These are significant increases to his armor and magic resist, so it shouldn't be a surprise to see Yi make a return as a carry in 1015. Protectors getting nerfed is the theme of this patch, as Neeko is having her mana change to 35 110 from 25 100. While the first cast will be at the same time, her subsequent casts will be less frequent, making her overall less effective. This, combined with the other protector nerfs, does hurt the trait a lot going into 1015. It's also a nerf to Star Guardian, of which Neeko was an important piece, but definitely affects protectors more. The last three-cost champion is Vayne, with a buff to her attack damage. Will now be 55 up from 50. It is a much needed buff to Vayne after she got absolutely destroyed by nerfs in 1014, so it should help make her more viable, although she may need more to return as a mainstay and carry. Unsurprisingly, Jhin is getting nerfed, with his fourth shot damage getting the forest treatment as it's going to 344, 444% from 350, 500%. It's not a huge nerf, but enough to hopefully lower his ridiculously high damage that was an issue in 1014. Jinx continues to be an enigma for balance as she's getting altered again. This time it's to her attack speed buff as it's going up to 50, 75, 125% from 50, 70, 100%. It's not too big of an increase at level 2, but it does make chasing a Jinx makes 3 more appealing. These consecutive patches of buffing and nerfing her slightly do pose the question of whether it's possible to ever get Jinx into a state of equilibrium within the meta. Soraka is getting swung on by the nerf bat as her healing is going down to 325-500 from 375-550. These numbers shouldn't be significant enough to make her useless, though it hasn't really felt like she's been part of the problem of any composition. That said, it should make Mystic and Star Guardian compositions slightly easier to deal with, as the healing that she provides will be lowered. And lastly, for the 4-cost champions is Viktor. Viktor fell off really hard in 10-14, so their buffing is mana to be 60 now instead of 70 to hopefully compensate the damage he lost last patch. Will it be enough to make him a relevant carry again? It's hard to say, especially with Syndra being untouched this patch. Janna is up next with a small change to her mana as it's going from 30-100 to 20-100. It's a small change to make her first cast take longer. She's still going to be really strong with any tier item, plus 3 or more Star Guardians should be enough to offset this nerf. And the last balance change to talk about for patch 10-15 is Xerath. He's getting 2 changes. First is a nerf to his health as it's going down to 700 from 750. The second is to his starting mana as it'll now be 20 instead of 30. Honestly, Xerath was quite strong late game, but these changes may not have addressed the real issue, which is his damage. That said, these changes should help players deal with him in fights a bit easier. They'll be more susceptible to infiltrators jumping on him, as well as effects like Shroud of Stillness, Mana Raver, and Ezreal's ultimate. These changes, plus Janna's casting slightly slower, should make him less of a late game powerhouse. It may be too big of changes considering he's a 5-cost champion, and 2-starring him is not an easy task. But having counterplay to him is a good thing, so we'll have to wait and see how these changes play out for his viability in 10-15. That is all we have for you today, folks. This is certainly the smallest balance patch we've had since the mid-season update, so hopefully it fixes the issues players had in 10-14. Let us know in the comment section below what you're most excited for with the new patch. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.